Hey guys, my name is Piers Kicks from BITKRAFT, and you're listening to the Tomorrow with Rovio podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Tomorrow with Rovio podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ben Mattis, and I have with me a very special guest today. Piers Kicks is a partner with BITKRAFT Ventures, a blockchain-focused venture capital group with a particular focus on gaming and entertainment. And this conversation with Piers is a really interesting one because obviously he's incredibly insightful in the subjects of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, the play-to-earn movement, how crypto is going to sort of overlap with gaming, all of that sort of stuff. Really, really interesting. Definitely an area I'm continuing to try and wrap my head around and understand. But one of the reasons why I found this interview so insightful myself is because, frankly, Piers has a very familiar background. I mean, he got his start in the crypto space playing video games and gold farming. And I mean, how many of us played MMOs and, had effectively little online businesses of some way, shape, or form? The only difference is Piers found a way to actually turn that into real money. And when I was his age, I didn't. But it was a really insightful interview. I learned a lot about this space, the challenges that are still in front of us to try and find a way to kind of bridge the gap from this highly decentralized world of blockchain technology and frankly, kind of the play-to-earn movement and the sort of centralized platform type gaming ecosystem that we live in today, where the Steams and the Apples and the Googles sort of have these incredibly strong walled gardens. And we had a lot of debate and discussion about sort of what would have to happen in order to bridge the gap between the two. If any of that sounds interesting to you, I think you'll find this an incredibly insightful interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks. All right. Well, here we go. Piers, we've been talking about this for weeks. It's so awesome to finally have you on the podcast and have a chance to dive into this conversation with you. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Massive fan of the podcast you've been running and excited to get going.
This should be fun. It's obviously we're going to talk a lot about decentralized and crypto and blockchain and metaverse kind of stuff. And we were just chatting earlier that it's an interesting time to be a fan of all of that stuff because a previous guest on the show, Matthew Ball, had a relatively big announcement today. You were saying you were up late reading his essays and tracking everything that he's doing.
I most certainly am. I'm a religious devourer of his essays. So excited to be on after Matthew.
Yeah, kudos. I had a brief chat with him yesterday and he's got a lot going on. It's a fun time to be a fan of the metaverse and be sort of, navigating in this huge web that we're all talking about. There's a lot going on. When you and I had our first, preliminary sync, I guess that was, a month or so ago, you shared a pretty fun story. And I thought it would be great to open with. You were talking about your sort of childhood and some of the things about your childhood that prepared you for a career in gaming and crypto. Sorry to ask you to go through exactly the same story a second time, but I wasn't recording it last time. And I thought it would be a great kickoff. So do you mind starting with that?
Yeah, for sure. I guess like many, grew up pretty fascinated by computers in general. Definitely gaming, but also beyond that. I think, from a very young age, I was always super interested in, messing around with different operating systems, figuring out how different bits of software worked. Was always fascinated with, wiring up amps and stuff whenever my dad would buy new hardware. Vividly remember, playing on his old Macintosh, playing Quake in 2003 or something when I was about 4 years old. I guess along the way, one of the games that really had a big impact on my life and definitely my brother's at the time as well was a game called Runescape, which first logged into in probably 2005 and most recently logged into about 2 weeks ago. So it's definitely stuck with me. That was a game that we played over many years, many summers, messed around with different sort of RuneScape private servers and various sort of things. But one of the things which kind of led me to crypto was messing around as many did back in the day with sort of gold farming aspects of those video games. I'm sure if people aren't familiar with RuneScape directly, they will have heard of World of Warcraft and whatnot.
Right.
And it's been a big trend for a long time, whereby people go into these game worlds and sort of mine resources and gather armor or whatever, and basically liquidate it for the game currency. And then typically, there are these sort of gray markets that operate around these game economies and would allow you to, usually with sort of like Chinese gold sellers, sell this stuff. So that's ultimately actually how I ended up getting my first sort of exposure to Bitcoin, where this is sort of like summer of 2012, I guess. And from there, I became sufficiently intrigued with it over the years. Kind of, grew up with that as like a backdrop. Was always pretty intrigued by the latest developments and whatnot. I think as I grew up, I learned a lot more about mining and different mining pools and rigs and reward types and whatnot. And obviously at the time I didn't really have the mental frame of reference to fully appreciate a lot of this stuff, but definitely as I grew up, that was a constant in the background for me. And I became increasingly curious and, ultimately also sort of led me to the Ethereum ecosystem, which I once this kind of idea of the world computer clicked. It was really opened my mind to a lot of possibilities, and I ended up sort of aping that both financially and intellectually, spending a lot of my time reading about it from sort of, I guess, back in 2016 onwards, was pretty interested in it all. And ultimately kind of stuck with that along the way. I was heavily playing games throughout all of this period, of course, played a bunch of FPSs, got to pretty high rank in Rainbow Six Siege, which was good fun. And then
awesome.
Ultimately went on to study sort of computer science and philosophy, only for a brief period before sort of meeting two backers who sort of wanted to invest in myself and my best mate, Ben, at the time. We sort of moved out to Seville in Spain and set up the first company out there, which is basically a investment fund focused on the crypto ecosystem. And that's kind of what sort of kicked it all off. And then things have evolved along the way. Ended up sort of meeting the Delphi Digital team. I'd just spent a bunch of time figuring out all the different jurisdictions and whatnot where we could sort of formalize an investment structure and raise proper external capital. And I'd started reading the sort of Delphi research, and these were 5 guys that had dropped out of Wall Street trying to bring this sort of institutional grade analysis to the digital asset space. And I'd been involved for quite a while, and it was definitely sort of the best research I'd seen. So was out in New York, and we got chatting, and ultimately paths converged, and I kind of have teamed up with those guys and sort of helped launch the venture arm of Delphi. And by extension, I've got much more involved over the past couple of years on the research business too, where in particular I've had a focus on the whole sort of NFT and gaming side of things, which is kind of my core excitement about a lot of this stuff. And then obviously even just in recent years, sort of 2017 onwards, where CryptoKitties started, and we started to think a bit more about, the concept of an NFT, what it is and what it can be used for. And obviously thoughts beginning to crystallize about the role that these technologies could play, and, how kind of the internet's going to evolve, and virtual worlds and virtual economies along with it.
And you ended up, and where are you now?
So most recently, as of I think 4 or 5 months ago now, I've joined the BITKRAFT team, who are awesome guys. One of the first sort of institutional game funds in the space.
Exactly.
Started in 2015, sort of focused on esports, but have now expanded to gaming and interactive media more broadly. So all very exciting.
So, okay, I wanted you to close with that, because you went from gold farming as a young teen to helping to run crypto arm of one of the larger, more successful gaming funds in the world in a relatively short period of time, which is awesome. And you made a connection there, which was, I'm going to paraphrase, yada, 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 gold farming, yada, 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 crypto. And so, you sort of said, you planted this seed that your experience with digital currencies and digital economies and persistent worlds and gold farming sort of planted the seeds that, grew to become this fascination in cryptocurrencies. And I've heard it said quite a lot that the virtual currencies in video games paved the way for cryptocurrencies, that a lot of the early adopters came from the gaming space. They were just natively comfortable with digital currencies. And I'd love for you to say to me and to the audience listening, what did gold in RuneScape have, or whatever the MMO or the persistent world is, or the game? What did the digital economy of RuneScape have that paper money monopoly doesn't, right? Why were these digital virtual currencies so imperative in laying the foundation for cryptocurrencies and their whatever subsequent explosion?
So I definitely think, it's a sort of psychological thing, right? It's just over all of those years, I think building that kind of familiarity and concept, familiarity around the concept of, natively digital value, is something that I and many others who also played WoW and these other MMORPGs kind of grew up with, right? These were worlds that, like, for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of my life, I would have probably preferred that sort of in-game currency over real currency, My brothers and I essentially lived in some of those game worlds for many years. And I think really having that sort of allowing one of these digital currencies to have that much sort of meaning and impact on you. I don't know, it's always, rather, it's not to me that perceptive or perceivable almost in terms of how it might have influenced my thinking around digital currency, because I kind of always just grew up with it as a given, right? Because that was like the context against which, these things that I sort of grew into was sort of set against. But I definitely think that there's something about these, sort of vast digital worlds that so many people are growing up in nowadays that sort of conditions you towards this radically different perception of, quote unquote, the digital realm, that perhaps, older generations or whatever don't have as much. I was always very familiar with the concept of value that is both created and consumed digitally. I'd spend hours upon hours of my summer slaving away on some runite ore in the wilderness just to buy some gear or whatever. So I don't think it's like as hard to wrap your head around if you've grown up that way.
And so, I mean, this is probably a very difficult question to answer, but we've all heard these stories. I've shared some of these stories myself on this, podcast of the young kid, quote unquote young kid, because some of them aren't so young anymore, who would happily take, a digital piece of clothing for their avatar over a physical item for their meat space feet, right? Like if it's their birthday, they'd rather get a pair of a sweet new Fortnite skin than a new pair of sneakers or something like that. We've all heard those, of these people. And these are the sort of, the natural audience, the natural denizens of this world where, digital items have equal, if not greater value than physical ones. But the thing that I sometimes find myself wondering and people asking me is, well, how many is that? Like, are there hundreds of them? Are there hundreds of thousands? Are there hundreds of millions? Do you have any sense at all of the sort of scale of that audience? Or that maybe audience isn't the right word, the scale of that demographic?
Yeah, I suspect that it's already pretty massive, Again, I think it's like, at least from when I grew up, I also have, 2 little brothers, littler brothers that are, 11 and 12 years old. Seeing them grow up, again, spending time in these worlds, maybe to a less of an extent than the manner in which my brothers and I did, but my older brothers, that is. But they definitely are sort of that way inclined. For them, the ultimate birthday present is already sort of V-Bucks, and that's definitely shared amongst all of their sort of peers at school and whatnot. So I totally think it's like a from here on out type thing rather than
from the heyday of MMO on. Is a generation of gamers who are growing up with sort of equal or greater value in the digital world than in the physical one.
Well, absolutely, and then obviously we've got some other sort of further catalysts or tailwinds for that on the horizon when we start talking about the mediums through which we interact with this stuff. When we start talking about virtual and augmented reality, I think that's going to take on a whole new level of meaning and tangibility to. Like if that trend wasn't already strong enough, it's coming. So
when the two converge, it's even more important. Absolutely.
So, I strongly suspect it will, in a shockingly small amount of time, you'll be asking the question of who doesn't feel that way rather than who does.
That's great. There's the sizzle right there. There's the teaser. In a shockingly small amount of time, we'll be asking who doesn't see more value in the digital world than the physical one. That's a great pull quote. Okay, let's change gears just for a second. So we have these chunks that I want to talk to you about, and I feel like I could talk to you like for hours because I have so much that I want to dig into. But let's start with chunk number one. I've labeled it here centralized versus decentralized, or closed versus open, or platforms versus, whatever, decentralized. So, a lot of the discussion today about metaverse, about crypto, very quickly either bubbles up or drills down, depending on your point of view, to this sort of diametrically opposite worldviews: the open versus closed, the centralized versus the decentralized, the 2.0 versus the 3.0. So in your own words, like, can you explain the difference between the two to set the stage for the following questions?
For sure. I mean, we could dig into some of the sort of different technical aspects, but I suspect that's probably less relevant for most people. I think the important thing to understand is that, blockchain and this fusion of technologies sort of, for the first time, enables the creation of platforms which aren't owned or controlled by anyone or any group in particular. And it kind of achieves this by replacing the role of the platform operator, whatever that is in whatever context, with a system of sort of crypto-economic incentives, code, and consensus rules, which everyone sort of agrees to operate within. And in doing so, it kind of unlocks, it kind of allows for the benefits of network effects without the costs of market power, right? Which often manifests in the form of sort of privacy, transaction, or censorship costs. And importantly, like, these incentive mechanisms usually mean that active participants in these protocols ultimately become their owners too.
Yep.
Not owners in an absolute sense, but they have some ownership in them, right? So major networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example, obviously pay block rewards to miners in exchange for helping secure the network. In other protocols, incentives might manifest in other ways, like take Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange protocol on top of Ethereum, that if I provide liquidity to, allowing others to sort of, switch one asset to another on top of Ethereum, then basically I share a portion of the fees generated by any given liquidity pool, for a sort of token pair that I'm helping facilitate. Even cooler, you have sort of additional incentives that come on top, perhaps unexpectedly. Again, in the context of Uniswap, there was something called a retroactive airdrop, whereby they essentially...
I heard about that. That was wicked cool.
Yeah, so nobody knew this was coming, but they basically took a snapshot of the network, and every address that had ever used, Uniswap's a protocol. It's a piece of code that lives on top of a blockchain, just operating in the wild. No one will ever turn it off. It can't be turned off. That's just how it is. Anyway, they saw everyone that had ever used it, and they basically sent them 400 uni tokens, which are basically a governance token for the protocol, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, and there's schools in India that paid for tuition with it, and all sorts of crazy cool stuff.
I mean, even after this sell-off, 400 uni tokens is probably worth, I don't know, $7,000 or $8,000. And for most people who have multiple addresses, right, that's quite a lot of money that everyone got airdropped. So super cool. But a bit more back on topic. The cool thing about these protocols and networks and sort of pieces of infrastructure is that they're kind of owned by everyone, and yet no one at the same time, right?
Yes.
It's this sort of credible neutrality of this shared open infrastructure that makes them attractive. These are sort of global, digitally native technologies that are in some sense operating on top of the legacy infrastructure stack, but that kind of almost extend the functionality of the internet, right, for everyone to use in a manner that's resistant to perhaps all forms of sort of coercion.
And so just to be clear, I'm going to interrupt for just 1 second. You are talking here about the decentralized, the 3.0, the web 3.0 or whatever.
Yeah. So
the opposite of the platform, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about what the new platform looks like, because I think we should be familiar enough with the existing sort of stack.
But just to be explicit, if you'll permit me, 10 seconds, Apple, Facebook, Google, those are 2.0. Those are platforms where, the company in question, Apple, is judge, jury, executioner. They control the entire ecosystem. They get to decide what's on it, how it's monetized, etc. And so it's by definition a closed platform. It is the complete opposite of what you're talking about.
Exactly. And they are the result of, the sort of logical endpoint or extrapolation, if you like, of the kind of organizational primitives that they evolved from, right?
Yep.
The concept of, a company which evolved into a platform, obviously grew up with the internet, and it's kind of like, it's just self-perpetuating the underlying sort of, hierarchy and structure of, an institution of a business that we kind of inherited from, I don't know where. But I think the cool thing about these decentralized technologies, these crypto economic systems, is that they're unlocking fundamentally new forms of, human coordination in essence that doesn't look like a corporation that,
like
of
DAOs
old.
and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. But even aside from DAOs, just the concept of, the Bitcoin network, it's like this organism that pays people to ensure its survival, right? These things it's really cool the way they work.
Yeah.
And it kind of, allows sort of disparate entities to trustlessly self-organize at massive scale in a way that looks nothing like your traditional company or corporate structure. And,
Cool.
and so you can kind of think of these decentralized technologies in essence as a disintermediation force that's beginning to sort of proliferate across any vertical where a network effect is captured by a centralized entity. So we can kind of think about this in the context of, Bitcoin, with arguably sort of central banks and the role that they have around money, right? In the context of DeFi, you're starting to see your traditional financial institutions disintermediated. I just mentioned Uniswap. There's all sorts of lending and borrowing protocols now.
Yep, absolutely.
Arguably, we're starting to see it with sort of games publishers, or like in the sense that, projects like Axie Infinity are, disrupting what a traditional game would look like. And by the way, Axie Infinity right now is generating more revenue than pretty much all of the top DeFi protocols, which is kind of crazy for a digital pet game. It's pretty nuts what that's kicking out right now. And then, of course, we have this whole Web 3.0 concept, right, which is kind of looking to sort of disintermediate the web's gatekeepers by prioritizing user sovereignty and sort of putting users back in control of their data.
Okay, so you've just listed so many, I guess, contributing factors to the rise of decentralized, or the growth of decentralized, right? There's financial incentives, there's economic sovereignty incentives, there's whatever. In fact, there's new organizational structure incentives. There's all sorts of reasons why decentralized is growing. You haven't talked a ton about regulation. Do you have any thoughts about the role of effectively the most centralized of all centralized authorities, i.e. government, and how it's shaping the sort of whatever epic struggle between centralized and decentralized?
So generally, I think that if regulation and the way it manifests kind of asphyxiates the undeniable explosion of innovation going on, you're going to contribute to effectively driving people and business away from your jurisdiction. In the same way when, the web was really evolving in the 90s and there was this sort of open versus closed debate then, there would be no Silicon Valley if, the latter had won out over the former. Right. And again, we're talking about something that is native to the internet, is global in nature. From a sort of game theory perspective, it makes no sense to, come crashing down with a heavy hand here. I totally think that lots of it, some aspects of the ecosystem could benefit from, better regulation. But, there needs to be a sufficient amount of time and learning and understanding on behalf of the regulators before they move in. Obviously, right. Post the whole ICO boom, we saw all sorts of terrible behavior, and rightly, justice has been brought down upon a lot of people there. But as I say, I think we're in a very different stage of evolution for these technologies, even from a few years ago. I think you hear how people that sit, in regulatory bodies are starting to applaud and embrace and speaking a bit more positively about a lot of this stuff. I think some of it is just so exciting and undeniably better in some respects than earlier models. I think it'll all happen. It'll all come together all in good time.
So, okay, I'm going to throw some particular names into this conversation. Like, the incumbents, the big platforms, the Facebooks and Googles and Apples, they obviously have a lot of money and they've got a lot of lawyers in their corner to try and ensure that they don't lose everything they've spent the last, 15, 20 years building to a potential 3.0 or decentralized wave. And so part of that is, fighting to keep their platforms closed. Part of that is, interacting with regulators who are maybe trying to kind of break up their monopolies. Part of that is, pushing back against, in lawsuits against people who are sort of trying to, sideload or what have you, if we look at the sort of, Apple versus Epic kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So do you see any chance of a sort of like iterative opening? Right? Like, or do you think it's going to be, they'll stay closed until open has won and then, like it'll be too late for them? Or do you think they might open up in steps? And I recognize that this is like hugely, hugely speculative, but I guess that idea of opening in steps versus just kind of like one day being closed and the next day being open it's unclear to me whether it's possible to iterate towards openness or whether decentralized openness has to be, at the architectural level. It has to be built into the DNA, not just of the organization, but of the entire stack.
Well, I definitely don't think it necessarily needs to be built in, at the very ground level. Like you could quite easily see a way that, if one of these big distribution platforms wanted to allow crypto-related activity through one of their stores, they could write a smart contract that dictates that any economic activity goes through it, that goes through it takes, X% in fees. So in that sense, on the distribution side, it probably would be possible. Obviously Google and Apple are undeniably of the most consequence here with the whole distribution duopoly. And it's an interesting question of like, what would it take for crypto to actually break these down, and will it be iterative or whatever? I think there definitely remains a huge amount of sort of uncertainty around how things like crypto games are going to evolve in this context, and how we might be able to actually have them on the App Store or whatever. For now, most people are still doing the sort of custom APK route. There's not a great solution on iOS just yet. And even if that proves to be too cumbersome, like some crypto games are just going to opt to have all transactional stuff take place in a web app, where you just authenticate your wallet and then you have your assets in the mobile app, and that's that. There's no actual trade there. But I'm wondering whether it ultimately manifests as like, some crypto-powered experience is so mind-blowing and exciting that everyone wants to sort of participate in it rather. It's not totally uncommon for platform choice to be driven by desire for a particular game ecosystem or even experience.
The killer app, right?
People buy PCs, even if they have Macs to access certain games. If you buy a PlayStation, if you're on Xbox and so on, it's not completely uncommon. And if people can't access something that everyone else wants in on from an iPhone, maybe over the next 5 years, there's this big breakout, then, maybe they really will go and buy, let's say, a Samsung. Like, we already know that Samsung's been making significant investments in blockchain infrastructure. Perhaps they'd be willing to fully embrace it along with their wallet technology on, let's say, the Samsung store. Like, obviously that would create some potential tensions with Google and stuff, but I can kind of see something like that as maybe a potential in terms of the iterative component. In this, in the same way that Epic's kind of looking to force the hands of other industry participants with reduced marketplace fees and other value-add services for developers, I don't think it's totally unreasonable to think that another relatively major player might try something, in the mobile space with a particular emphasis on crypto as a means of distinction. I should note that I think we're a long way from most Web3 experiences actually rivaling the convenience and UX of existing platforms.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I think we might get there. And it's hard to see a more crypto native distribution platform or even sort of operating system emerging in the near term, simply due to the, sheer size of most of these incumbents at this stage. But yeah, that's kind of how I think we might see a sort of stepping stone type approach. And yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's great. I like first of all, I like the point that, a killer app could be an iteration, and also the suggestion that there are, whatever you want to, like, I don't want to call them tier 2 because it's not like Samsung's a small fish, but there are other major players in the technology ecosystem who might have a slightly different perspective on open versus closed. And if one of them were to come to the table with like a big sort of what you liken to like an epic level, epic Fortnite kind of level move, that also might kind of sort of start the snowball rolling down the hill. So those are good examples of ways that we could see closed platforms kind of be forced to iterate towards openness, which is really cool. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about, you've brought it up a couple of times, like Axie Infinity. Obviously, there's other sort of, whatever quote unquote big-ish crypto games out there right now. You've got your Sandbox, you've got your Decentralized, Blankos. I know that there are, whatever, My Neighbor Alice. There's sort of new ones, it seems, are being announced almost, weekly these days. Have you played them? Mm-hmm. Frankly, do you play them?
Not religiously, not in the way I'd play other games. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the sophistication of game experiences is where it could be yet. I think that aside, though, there's something beautiful and exciting about the exploration of an entirely new business model around gaming.
Absolutely.
When you look at Axie Infinity, I don't think people quite appreciate the speed and extent of their growth lately. Go back 4 months, 3 months, they're at, 38,000 daily active users. That's now like 200,000, right? This is blowing up all across, emerging markets in particular, the Philippines, Venezuela, Pakistan, India. Yeah. And there are all of these wicked stories coming out of this whole, play to earn ecosystem about people who have realized that they can earn more playing these games than, working their job as a sort of taxi driver or whatever. And look, it's obviously still very early. Like Axie is the breakout case study for play to earn gaming. There are still some questions around, sustainability in that ecosystem and what these game economies look like as they mature. I mean, it's already pretty big, this economy, but like, it's really exciting to be a part of and, participate in discussions and forums. And, there's all these governance proposals that anyone who owns the tokens for the game have a vote in. Like, it's a very exciting time to be exploring all of these things.
Totally agree.
I think, I don't know, obviously I'm hugely convicted in all of this stuff, but it seems to me like the biggest shift easily, comfortably since sort of mobile. Gameplay aside, these things are fascinating to me. And I think they're going to inform, what the future looks like.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess, so, the sort of business finance nerd in me, the speculator in me finds these things fascinating, right? The gamer in me does not. Mm-hmm. And I am anxious and excited to see that change. And I'm wondering, I'm curious, I'm sort of anxiously scanning the horizon to see when we're going to get that, and maybe that's the killer app, right? That first blend between really sort of engaging, innovative, engrossing gameplay, narrative, mechanics, the kinds of things that you would expect in a RuneScape or whatever, Rainbow Six Siege or a Fortnite or what have you, married with everything that we've been talking about in terms of, whatever, the explosive growth and potential financial freedom and sovereignty and whatnot of a game like Axiom. That marriage is very interesting and inspiring to me.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. I don't know. I think by the end of next year, though, what you just described will be here from a gameplay perspective. Whether there'll be enough variety of high quality games that one in particular piques your interest is another question. But
of course,
I've been really strongly encouraged by conversations I've been having, seeing real game developer talent moving into this space. Then comes the problem, though, that the technology, whilst it's improving all the time and all the major bottlenecks in the form of scalability and usability are being solved, there's some awesome solutions coming to market. I think from the developer tooling perspective, you can't hope to engage at this stage without, at least some blockchain knowledge. If you're building today, right?
Yeah.
I think that changes in 6 months. There's a bunch of projects building really interesting tooling that make it much easier. You don't need to write in Solidity. Yep. But right now, that's what I'm saying. It's like this rare on the Venn diagram between game developer and crypto developer. There's a sweet spot which few people are filling right now, but definitely changing.
Cool. Okay, so that was an interesting conversation about sort of centralized versus decentralized. Another topic that I want to talk about, I mean, they're all interconnected, right? Talking about Venn diagrams, there's a big overlap in this second theme with that first one. But I want to talk about marketplaces, or in general, the idea of sort of, a decentralized marketplace, peer-to-peer, as opposed to, whatever, like the in-game shop that we've all become so, familiar with over the last 20 years of playing these games with these digital currencies and these digital economies. So, I mean, creators matter, right? I had Blake Robbins on here. He was an awesome guest to talk about, the creator economy. I have other guests I'm lining up who have a ton of thoughts about creators and why they exist and how to service them and include them in part of the development process and all sorts of stuff. So clearly, creators are what did Blake call them? They're the modern day celebrities, right? So creators matter. Creator content matters. User-generated content matters. And we know that creators would like to get paid for their creations, right? I mean, of course, some people just do it for the love and some people just do it for the likes. But generally speaking, if you're incentivized to hone your craft, that the greatest incentive that there is continues to be monetary for most people. So how does crypto help that challenge, the challenge of financially incentivizing creators?
So yeah, I think one of the first things that I've kind of touched upon is that to begin with, you're operating on a global financial infrastructure that is native to the internet. So to begin with, there's some degree of advantage in terms of how streamlined that is, and addressable market in terms of I guess just payments and economics around stuff. I think legacy payment infrastructure has significantly more friction than this space does. Once you're in, that is, obviously there's the onboarding process that people need to familiarize with this new sort of tech stack. But once that's out the way, you have stuff like programmable cash flows all of a sudden, right? Which give rise to sort of on-chain royalties, such that now basically, these crypto native platforms that lend themselves to things like UGC, where maybe some big streamer wants to come in and make a custom avatar or, virtual asset and sell it in the store. Whereas, Roblox is taking maybe 70% of revenues, I think it is. Here, the game company, is probably taking, 25% on primary sales. So already, that's in the interest of the creator. And then again, the reason they can do that is because there's this secondary monetary, this secondary revenue stream, which we don't have typically, which is capturing a small percentage, let's say, maybe 5%, as a marketplace fee, right? So all secondary market activity that now occurs, whereas you might have a streamer skin in, Rainbow Six, you might have a weapon charm, which is sold once and that's that, you do your drop. Now you might have a limited edition drop. People, are really excited about this. They bid it up. The primary sales go for a bunch. People are willing to invest more because they know it's an actual asset and they own it. And so, you do well off the primary sales, maybe not on par with what you would have got, in the traditional setup, but still very well. You keep, 75% as opposed to 30% of the revenues. And then as this secondary market builds for it, if you've done your drop properly, it's an asset that people desire. Maybe it has some utility within this game context, or, can unlock maybe a private Discord with the creator or something. There's demand for this on a secondary market. And as those items are traded around, there's no in perpetuity. There's ongoing, revenue generated from that marketplace fee for the platform operator too. So that's one of the, really cool aspects of this whole thing that I think is super interesting.
So the way I see it, and forgive me if I'm missing something, maybe you'll have to go through it one more time, but it sounds like there are 4 key stakeholders for that to work. There's the game developer, let's call them developer. There's the streamer, the personality, let's call them creator. There's the platform themselves, like OpenSea or whatever. So let's call them platform. And then there's the players, the consumers. So they're the players, right? So creator makes an asset for a game that's done by a developer, and that asset is probably found in the game, right? So whatever a player comes along, they unlock or they somehow earn this asset, this skin. They immediately decide to list it, to sell it, to resell it instead of use it. So they put it on the platform. They put it on OpenSea, and it's
So just to jump in here,
okay.
real quick. So I wouldn't say there are four. I'd say there are three. There's the game dev, which also operates what you were calling the OpenSea there. Most of these games have an in-game marketplace too, which the game developer operates, and they collect those revenues I just described from. So it's the game dev, the players, and the creators. Yeah.
Okay. So that's cleaner then. Thank you for that. So the game dev is the platform. The skin sells. The creator gets, say, 70%. The dev/platform gets, let's just say for argument, 30%. Now that skin is in the hand of another player who can also list it again on the platform, right? And it is the suggestion that on each subsequent resell, all three, players in this ecosystem, all three can continue to financially benefit. The developer can continue to take some sort of cut through smart contracts. The creator can continue to take some sort of cut through smart contracts. And the new owner, the reseller, gets whatever profit that they get from the selling of the asset. Is that right?
100%. And all of this happens in a beautifully transparent manner that anyone can click, the governing contracts and see the exact revenue split. The original creator can decide that, post primary sale, maybe I'm not going to participate in ongoing revenue, and that's all for the collector. And then it's just the game dev taking their small fee. Or they can set it up that, maybe that ongoing royalty is split between the game dev and the creators, such that, let's say there's a 10% fee every time it's sold in the future, 5% goes to the creator and 5% to the game dev. The point is that there is a new revenue stream based upon ongoing trade activity, which isn't really a thing in the traditional model.
Absolutely.
And if you have any conviction in how big these economies can grow, it's pretty easy to back out at just how significant those revenues could be.
Yep. But okay, so that makes sense. So hypothetically, right, someone makes an Axie Infinity 2, and it goes even bigger than Axie Infinity, and it's like super huge, super successful. It becomes like the killer app, right? Well, maybe it's Axie Infinity, right? Do you have any thoughts on this sort of the consumer's perception of centralization? What I mean by that is, like, today, if in Animal Crossing, if Nintendo were to associate itself with what is currently aftermarket, the gray market of Animal Crossing assets, well, then suddenly they have a perceived and or legal liability, right? So if you're selling a certain number of bells, and I come in to buy the bells from you, and it turns out to be a scam, my inclination, first and foremost, is I'm going to want to get on the phone with Nintendo and say, hey, I got scammed in your game. Give me my bells back, right? And obviously, if this is a big game and there's lots of these transactions inside this marketplace, that's potentially a lot of CSR, a lot of tickets for Nintendo to manage. They've made the decision they don't want to have anything to do with that. And probably for other reasons as well. So any Animal Crossing aftermarket stuff is, entirely outside of the game and is entirely done sort of peer to peer. If someone gets scammed for an Axie Infinity asset, is there inclination to go to the developer SkyMaven and say, hey, I want my money back? Or how does SkyMaven handle this potential for a huge amount of service tickets as the scale grows and more people might, be dissatisfied with their trade?
Sure. Well, I'd suggest that the first instance that you described, with Nintendo preferring that everything happens outside of the game in a peer-to-peer fashion, is exactly the same thing that happens with Axie. Only the peer-to-peer fashion isn't governed by player auctions and scammy middlemen. It's governed by smart contracts in which being scammed is effectively impossible, because, that's not how trade works on there. Unless there's some duplicate listing. In fact, you wouldn't even be able to list a fake Axie in the game store, because that's not sort of how the marketplace works. But essentially, by giving users that sovereignty and ownership over their assets, you're doing the same thing that Nintendo is. It's just the trade that's happening is, again, like on this very robust financial infrastructure where being scammed is pretty much impossible versus going, like player auctions or whatever.
Right, but one major or perhaps minor difference, one difference is that under the smart contract model, this hypothetical Nintendo has a financial stake, right? Currently, Nintendo has no financial stake in the gray market, so they can absolutely wipe their hands of it. If they have a financial stake, if they take some sort of cut in every trade, and maybe it's true that there will be a lot less, whatever scams or problems because of smart contracts, but I don't think they can wipe their hands of it, right?
No, you're absolutely right there, and that's definitely an important difference to point out. But yeah, I mean, I'd strongly suggest that scamming is pretty much, I don't really see how it would happen if you're operating within, yeah.
Okay, so that's very interesting that the architecture, the smart contract, can probably help reduce to close to zero the number of actual scam interactions, which means, the interactions that are left are kind of buyer remorse interactions, which are, obviously there's a lot more framework for saying, sorry, not sorry kind of thing when someone comes to you and says, I want my money back because whatever, my asset hasn't increased in value.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, if this asset is listed on the in-game marketplace, it's up there with a price, anyone can bid on it. If the bid is accepted by the owner of that asset, the crypto is automatically transferred to their wallet and the Axie goes to them, all governed by a smart contract. Yep. Unless you're messing around in a shady Discord doing black market fake Axie dealing, then, at which point I also think Sky Mavis could just say, nothing to do with me. You were being, silly.
Yeah. Yeah. Any interaction, any exchange you're going to do has to be protected through our smart contracts, which means it has to be done through our decentralized store, not direct peer-to-peer through some other vehicles, some other means, because otherwise we can't use the benefits of the smart contract to make that thing actually safe and secure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. And I guess in some ways, then this is more of a sort of philosophical question, but we've talked a lot about digital currency and digital assets, and I guess by extension, digital wealth. So, I mean, do you perceive trends? Do you see any sort of high level trends when it comes to this physical versus digital wealth? Like, whatever. My youngest son is 6 years old. He's whatever they call him, Generation Alpha or something. Like, is the American dream, the quote unquote American dream, like I have a job, I have a wife, I have a home, I live there my whole life, I've got the picket fence, I've got the kids and the dog and the car. Like, is that well and truly dead? And, whatever digital wealth is just like the nail on the coffin for that? Do digital nomads, are they more in tune with digital wealth and cryptocurrency because they have no interest in settling down and so they want everything to be liquid and digital? Do you have any sort of thoughts about the sort of higher level societal trends as they relate to the question of physical versus digital?
Sure. Well, I definitely, at least, speaking with everyone I've ever discussed such things with, like, the American dream, as it was just described, definitely, lacks appeal on that front. I think I wish I could say that, like, I don't know, more of sort of, the generation and the people I've grown up with had a strong opinion in either direction as it pertains to this physical versus digital wealth. But I don't think they do. I don't think there's like a big driving notion of what would be cool or what would be interesting or anything to work towards in the same way perhaps the American dream sort of once was. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of already a lot of time spent digitally is pretty mindless. To be totally honest, I even observe it in my younger brothers in a way that myself and my other two older brothers just weren't really like that. It's like succumbing to all of the things that have been carefully architected to absorb attention. But for those that are paying attention to some of the shifts and what's going on, and suddenly an increasing number of my friends are getting seriously into crypto and treating it how they would a savings account, but perhaps much more aggressively, beginning to recognize perhaps some of the failings of, the legacy financial infrastructure and economy. And I definitely think the whole COVID thing and obviously the extent to which printing is happening in such a short amount of time is a common feeling and sort of awareness amongst people now. And, you have that backdrop versus all of this exciting stuff going on out there. People finding real communities that are global in such a way that they can now travel around the world and go to any city and see buddies that they've known on Twitter for ages.
Absolutely.
And people that they, shared cool experiences with, especially in crypto, whether that's around collecting certain things from particular artists you love or going to some of these events that are hosted in these different worlds. There's definitely a very interesting sense that, maybe this new way is better than the old. It also feels like, at least for me, that just any money that I store digitally is just way safer than being anywhere else. Let alone, the sort of material financial upside that can come from participating in DeFi and investing in some of this stuff. It's just, I don't know, I feel significantly more comfortable with, money in a wallet on a ledger than in a bank where it's prone to, whatever might happen.
Yeah, whatever market conditions you have no control over.
Yeah, exactly. So, I definitely think, there's a big shift happening there, but just far too few people would be my suggestion, of perhaps the younger generations are actually paying attention to this stuff.
Cool. Okay. That's very interesting. And we can't talk about crypto and not talk about, whatever, about green, right? I mean, they currently don't go hand in hand. It could be argued for, Gen Z, who admittedly does care about the environment, who does care about the future of the world at a sort of, demographic level, right? It is a trend that is shared quite deeply amongst many Gen Z, regardless of their nationality. Crypto historically has had, a bit of a bad rap because, there's been tons of media about, the cost of, proof of work and Bitcoin and all the energy consumption from the mining and all that kind of stuff. So without going into all the kind of technical specifics of it, I mean, we don't have to get into a sort of detailed proof of stake sort of breakdown kind of thing. Do you think that as crypto gets greener, right? Do you think we will see a bigger uptick in its adoption? And will that be a signal boost for Gen Z to increase their adoption of crypto because they no longer have it clash with another value they hold dear, which is the desire for a greener world?
Perhaps, although I'd kind of question the extent to which there are, all of these Gen Z people on the sidelines because of environmental concerns. I mean, I know it does the rounds and obviously warrants attention, but I'm not sure to what extent people are feel like they can't participate because of that.
Okay.
I definitely think, obviously with all NFTs blowing up and whatnot, there are all of these, FUD articles about each NFT burns an Olympic swimming pool of water or whatever it is. Anyway, there were things like that, which generally stem from a poor understanding of how the systems actually work. We reasoned through all of that. There was a bunch of essays published and a bunch of back and forth, which again, just great to be a part of this community and have these discussions, taking place and being a part of them. But, nobody is really opposing something like Ethereum's shift to proof of stake. The sooner that comes, the better. Obviously, this is a major computer science feat, which is kind of like rebuilding a plane midair. So also don't want to rush that. There's billions of dollars of value at stake. Yeah. And then on the flip side, I'm probably sympathize to some extent with the idea that at least one major proof of work chain should exist, just because the different consensus mechanism sort of lends itself to, a different type of resilience. There are certain potential threat vectors that apply to proof of stake that don't to proof of work and vice versa. And I think when we're talking about something as dramatic and profound as, essentially digital gold, something that is going to fulfill that function, whereas, gold has for how many thousands of years, yes, the cost seems super high, but as all the studies have shown, like, what's the cost of maintaining the modern fiat system and whatnot by comparison? It's like, it might be one of these instances of a lesser of two evils. And when you compute it all by comparison, I don't think it's actually as shocking as it might seem.
Okay, cool. Fair. That's an interesting counterpoint. You are obviously much deeper in it than I am. And so my analysis of it is quite anecdotal, right? So I can speak for the people that I know, the articles that I've read, the little sort of bubbles of the internet that I participate in. But I do get the feeling that in my circle, you're in three camps. Either you're all in on crypto, or you're not all in crypto because it just doesn't make sense. And you just think, I don't understand how, anything that's not real could ever matter. Or you understand the potential of crypto, but you're worried about the environmental impact. And I would say most of the people that I know fall into one of those three buckets. And of course, it's more nuanced than that. Mm-hmm. But that's just my sort of anecdotal perception. And is that there's a non-insignificant percentage of peers and younger, of my age group, who, when I talk to them about crypto, they understand, about as much as I do, but are turned off by their perception of the environmental impact of it. So the messages about how that's a false concern, or sorry, maybe a lesser of two evils, are not necessarily getting through to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the literature available on this is so comprehensive and brilliant across the board. You've got people like Nick Carter write amazing, elaborate essays addressing this head on. I think, there is a lot of nuance to it. Obviously, it's a contentious topic given the stakes are high. Obviously, to some extent, you can probably believe that there are coordinated FUD campaigns around some of this stuff. On the flip side, you can obviously acknowledge some people probably get overly dreamy and overly defensive about it. But if you drill down and really dig into it, like, there's a lot of nuance that gives me comfort on that front.
Well, I don't know his essays, but I will check them out right after this podcast. I've taken a note. And I guess the last section that I have here, I've labeled lessons and messages. And so I thought this would sort of be a fun exercise, which is like, clearly you believe very passionately in the potential of crypto to disrupt everything: gaming, finance, corporate governance, etc. And because of the nature of this podcast, the nature of my world, I'm probably more suited to talk about gaming and the various players in the gaming industry than I am about, whatever DAOs or something like that. So I thought it'd be fun to have us close with a sort of different message from you for each of the various players in the current, value chain of game development, distribution, and consumption. And so I thought it would be interesting to start with the developers. So Piers, what message do you have for the developers? What do you wish the Ubisofts, the Rovios, and the Riots of the world knew about crypto that maybe currently today they might be getting wrong?
Well, yeah, I think one of the important things is kind of just acknowledging, the state of the technology, that a lot of the bottlenecks to engaging with this stuff at scale, like, really are being solved. Things like the scalability side for the Ethereum ecosystem, looking extremely exciting with some super compelling solutions hitting the market. I think oftentimes I feel a little frustrated when I chat to people around the industry when they present these arguments against crypto that have been addressed sort of head on multiple times. I'd also just encourage people to a bit more earnestly explore some of the writing out there. I think there's some awesome information online that addresses you can get a very long way into forming a very robust opinion pretty quickly now. That's one thing the space has been really good at, is making resources available. And then, I think, especially for maybe, the more indie crowd or whatever, like, all of this infrastructure is falling into place. It's an incredibly exciting time. I know exactly where I'd been looking. It's obviously still early in this transition, but as I alluded to earlier, like, if this thesis plays out to even half its potential, this is still going to be the biggest shift in the games industry since, the advent of mobile, right?
Absolutely.
And to be honest, I've actually been pretty surprised on the larger publisher side. Like, they're definitely very aware of what's going on. And I think we may actually see some activity from a number of them sooner than many think. Ubisoft, for example, has already been active in this space for a couple of years, and always super impressed chatting with those guys. They've got a great idea of how this stuff can be used and where it's going.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I've also been impressed at how much news I've read about Ubisoft's the plays that they're making, the investments that they're making, the bets that they're placing on the crypto space. And Ubisoft is an old stomping ground of mine, so obviously that's pretty cool to see. Okay, so what about the creators? The Ninjas, the Prestons, the Mr. Beasts, the top level streamers, the people making great content inside a Roblox or inside a core. What message do you have for them about whatever the potential of crypto?
Well, I guess there's kind of two different camps there. I think first for the like bigger creators, I think if you take a peek under the hood, the sort of creator tooling being unlocked, in the form of maybe NFTs and social tokens is so powerful and offers this wicked brand new sort of monetization spectrum and these brilliant mechanisms for interacting much more directly and much more deeply with your audience.
Yep.
To give you an example, and it comes from the music realm, some of my buddies from Delphi, where I came from prior to BITKRAFT, massive fans of Disclosure, and Disclosure was auctioning off an NFT of the original Disclosure face from the original album artwork. And a few buddies got together, pooled the funds, and bought this thing. Yeah, it went for quite a lot, but at the same time, it offered you 4 front row tickets to every concert in perpetuity. They ended up, connecting in a Telegram chat, and now Anil from Delphi has become really good buddies with them, to the extent that Disclosure ended up, DJing a house party that they hosted down in Miami a few weeks ago. Like, this is such cool technology that can just unlock really interesting stuff like that in, kind of whatever way you want to go with it. So I think there are very creative ways you can leverage these, new tools to build a deeper relationship with your audience, and also in many instances, like, allow them to participate in your success with a shared economic upside.
Yeah.
Jesse Walden from Variant has some great thoughts around this that he calls Patronage Plus, that I strongly recommend people check out.
Cool. Okay. You said you wanted to split it into 2. You talked about the bigger creators. Is there a different value chain for smaller creators, or?
I think we've kind of touched upon it earlier. Just understanding like how the economics of these other platforms can totally skew in your favor versus the existing stuff, right? Your sort of chunk of the pie is that much bigger. There's also this additional new revenue stream that's like ongoing that you can participate in. And again, it's like, global by default. There's already obviously some degree of sort of capital abundance in crypto. Like, strongly recommend testing the waters.
Cool. Okay. I guess 3 and 4 in any order you want. Platform holders, what do you want the Valves, the Apples, the Googles of the world to know about crypto? And then I guess players.
Sure, I guess I'll do players first, so we can end on a bad note. But
we're coming. The zombies are coming.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, for the players, I just say there is literally no better way to truly learn about these technologies beyond just using them. Go and buy some ETH, spin up a crypto wallet. Like, the fastest way to educate yourself is to go and experiment. This is an incredibly exciting time to be involved with a sort of new emerging dimension of the games industry that, some people, I included, are of the view is going to be, profoundly important. And let alone the fact that, for some of these strong community members that rally around these projects early on, they've also seen, significant financial upside if that's something that's of interest to people. It's changing quickly, but the past couple of years have given me the same vibes as, the first time I started using VR in the early days, or even messing around with some, sort of first gen games of different genres over the years. But, things are kind of clunky, although again, that's changing, but it's somehow really rewarding to work through these teething pains. I'm very
Absolutely.
confident that the more people dig into the potential of this decentralized infrastructure, both for gaming and beyond, the more convinced they will become. To some extent, like stickiness has been driven in games a lot by sort of exploiting player psychology by building these sort of compulsion loops, right? People whip out Candy Crush intending to play for 5 minutes, but end up playing for an hour. And maybe sometimes it doesn't feel great. By contrast, like the incentive structures of these new games and worlds is through shared economics and actual ownership, a sort of skin in the game. At least to my mind, that's significantly more compelling and at the very least warrants some further investigation. And, I appreciate the games aren't quite AAA yet, but if you believe in this conceptually, like I definitely think it's worth familiarizing yourself with already. And yeah, as I say, super early, but there's loads to figure out still. But it's very fun to be a part of and either follow or participate in governance discussions around protocols and games. At the end of the day, these are community owned and driven projects that like everyone can own a piece of if they want to.
Yes.
So yeah, I think the communities around these things are super exciting.
Cool. I like that.
And then, lastly, to the kind of platforms out there, I guess it's hard to do it with sort of, I'll probably have to just use broad strokes because it kind of varies by platform, right? There's some crypto games already on Steam through Valve, like obviously the Apple, Google mobile distribution thing's tricky to speculate on. Like, let's kind of see how the full consequences of this Apple Epic case sort of play out. But yeah, I mean, I just think hard about what these technologies are at their core and like how they do potentially present a massive threat. I mean, it's kind of tricky to figure out how these two could be reconciled because one's kind of the antithesis of the other.
Yes, exactly.
We've kind of been given these tools that we can sort of by their very design, build things which can't be sort of corrupted or broken in the way. Not to suggest legacy institutions are, but Chris Dixon, I think it might have come from, said that there's in crypto we have this play on one of Google's original slogans that was don't be evil, which now feels rather amusing. But where Web 2 was don't be evil, Web 3 is can't be evil, right?
Right.
Everything,
I've read that quote.
Everything is baked into the code on a transparent public ledger for all to see. I mean, it's a very important shift in the way we operate as a society on the internet. And, I think as we start talking about the metaverse and increasingly pervasive and immersive digital environments, like all of the potential threats of some of these perhaps more value extractive business models that have governed the web for a while are only amplified, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess that's my message.
That's a good message, man. That's a good message. You gave me exactly what I was looking for. Well, Piers, looking at we're an hour and 10 in. I feel like every one of these 4 bubbles could have been an hour-long podcast in their own right. You're very articulate. You're very well educated. You're very passionate. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you about this stuff. I always close with the same question, or rather, I guess I have been for the last few months. I didn't necessarily start doing this, but did I not ask you anything you thought I was going to ask you? Or like when I first reached out to you, did you think there was an opportunity here to talk about something that you held dear that we didn't get a chance to go over today? Because if so, this closing section is a great chance to do that.
I don't actually think so. I think we've done a pretty good job of covering a lot of these topics. I don't know. I guess just would want to add that I talked about these technologies fundamentally being disintermediation technologies. We talk about how incumbent institutions are reacting to them, how they might adapt to them. Like at the higher level, when I was also talking about Bitcoin in the context of central banks and actual money, like, this pattern is playing out all over the place right now. Like, I don't know whether listeners would have been following what's going on down in El Salvador. This country has just announced Bitcoin as legal tender and that they're going to airdrop, some Bitcoin to all of their citizens. And like, when we start talking about, whether a Samsung might embrace on the Samsung store, crypto enabled applications, like Samsung doing that feels significantly less rogue than a country announcing, you know what I mean? So I just wanted to like touch upon that, because I know these things might seem like they're beyond the realm of possibility in the immediate term, but you know, things can change really quickly. I'm pretty confident, you know, one of these bigger sort of incumbents will, you know, adopt a strategy to this effect. And yeah, as I say, just exciting time to be involved, and I strongly urge everyone to, you know, at the very least, actually get some hands-on experimentation with it and check
absolutely.
it all out.
And you said something earlier, which I 100% agree with, which is, you know, buy some Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever, because there's no better way to learn than to have skin in the game. You know, whatever, yada yada yada, disclaimer, not financial advice, blah blah blah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I did a couple of years ago, because I was reading these articles and I was just saying, oh my god, I don't understand. I have a hard time caring. And then I bought my first, you know, it was like $100 worth of Ethereum or something like that, and magically suddenly I cared a whole lot more. So
Exactly.
it doesn't take a huge investment to give yourself the incentive to start exploring deep and understanding a little bit more about why this stuff can be so transformative.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
All right, sir. Have yourself a wonderful day. Have yourself a wonderful summer. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Ben, really appreciate it. Super fun. Always a fan of the pods, and look forward to following along for the rest of them.
All right, talk to you soon. And that's a wrap. As usual, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Tomorrow with Rovio podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ben Mattis. I was joined today by Piers Kicks, partner at BITKRAFT Ventures, an overall enthusiast in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, particularly as it relates to the world of gaming. If you found any of the topics we covered today interesting, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know if you'd like me to deep dive further into the play to earn space or anything related to NFT, how NFTs overlap with gaming, and you have suggestions about guests I should be speaking to dive deeper into that space. Please reach out on Twitter or email or LinkedIn. I'm not hard to find. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to dive in deeper. I find this space fascinating. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy. Talk to you soon.